Today on Sugar Spun Run, we'll be making raspberry scones. Hey Sugar Spun Bakers, Sam here, and today I am so excited to be bringing you another carefully tested, well-researched, and perfected recipe. You guys already know I love my scones. I like a nice, flaky, buttery, melt-in-your-mouth scone. Today I am taking them to the next level. We are adding raspberries. I think you're going to love them, so let's get started. The first thing you want to do is preheat your oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. Now for today's recipe, I am going to be using a food processor. If you do not have one, I will include notes in the recipe, the printable recipe, how you can make it without one, but I really recommend using a food processor if you have one. Now to this food processor, we are going to start by adding 3 cups of all-purpose flour. Scones are best when they are lightly sweetened, so we are going to be adding 6 tablespoons of granulated sugar. This doesn't make for a super sweet scone, but it definitely adds a nice flavor and a perfect subtle sweetness. Toss in 1 tablespoon of baking powder and a ½ teaspoon of salt. Just add your lid on top, and we are just going to briefly pulse everything together so those dry ingredients are nicely combined. Okay, the next thing you need is 12 tablespoons of butter. This is unsalted butter and you want it to be really, really cold. In fact, I like to toss mine in the freezer about 15 to 20 minutes before I begin making my scones. That way it's really, really cold. Now the cold butter is important for a couple of reasons. Primarily, I would say you want it to be really cold because you don't want your scones spreading in the oven, but more importantly, you want to have those tender, light, layers. You want a nice buttery flavor. You're not going to get that if you use room temperature butter. Now this butter is already pretty hard to cut after only 15 minutes in the freezer. If you keep yours in much longer than that, it's kind of going to be like cutting ice. And I'm cutting this into about tablespoon sized pieces. It's not an exact science. We'll just scatter these over the top of your flour mixture. Pop that lid back on there and we are going to pulse everything together again. Seems a little violent because all that butter is really cold, but just keep pulsing. Now you don't want to overdo it here. I want to show you exactly what this is supposed to look like. Okay, so I only pulsed this for a couple of seconds until I felt like the butter was nicely cut in by the blades of the food processor. You can see there are a couple of butter pieces in here remaining. This one's a little bit smaller than the size of a chocolate chip. I have a little bit of a larger one here. This looks good. I feel like it's nicely incorporated, but the butter's not completely, obliterated. Okay, so the next thing you're going to need is 3/4 cup of heavy cream. And along with that, I like to add just a little bit of vanilla extract. This is 1/4 teaspoon of vanilla extract. It's just a small amount. I'd like to mix this together, so I'm just gonna grab my knife and swirl those together a little bit. Now, if you wanted to add another extract, you would want to do that here. Lemon extract is a really, really nice pairing with a raspberry, or even if you wanted to toss in some lemon zest, that would be great here as well. I'm just going to drizzle this over the flour mixture, nice and kind of evenly. And we are going to pulse again just until the ingredients start to clump together. You don't want to overdo it. Let me show you. All right, take a look at this. So the batter is, I'd say, slightly crumbly, but if you press it together, it holds together perfectly. This is exactly what you're looking for. I wouldn't go any further than this. Now I'm going to transfer this over to a clean surface. Before we go any further, I do want to talk about your countertop or your surface that you're using really quickly. Make sure you're not making these scones on a surface that stains easily. My countertop is not going to stain. I know that because it would already be ruined by now if that were the case. If you're worried about yours, put down a piece of wax paper. Make this on a cutting board instead because raspberries stain very easily. It's very hard to get that out. I also want to mention I have a little bit of flour here. If my dough starts to get a little bit sticky, if it's not coming off the counter easily, I'm just going to use that. So I have that nearby. I have this dough. I'm going to start to form it into a rectangle, but it's still pretty crumbly. That's fine. At this point, I'm going to start adding raspberries. When making raspberry scones, I strongly recommend you use frozen raspberries. Fresh fruit will work, but the problem I found is that it's really soft and really squishy. So we're going to be folding this dough over itself a couple of times and they just get completely squished. It's very messy, it's very hard to work with. With the frozen raspberries, I can take these and I can press them into the dough very easily. Now typically I usually just eyeball it with how many raspberries I want to add, but I know you guys are going to want an exact number. I have found that a heaping 1/2 cup of berries is usually the perfect amount for this dough. Any more than that and it can tend to fall apart or have a little bit too much moisture in it, and any less than that and you might as well make plain scones. Zach just pointed out to me that a heaping 1/2 cup is not exact, but that's as close as I'm going to be able to get for you today. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. So now I'm going to form it into a rectangle, and I'm going to press on it a little bit more. With scone dough, you never want to overwork it. You don't want to make it too warm, but you do need it to come together. I have a nice wide rectangle, so I'm gonna grab myself a big sharp knife, and I'm going to cut that clean in half by pressing straight down. Now I'm gonna take this first half and I'm going to place it over my second half, and I am just going to work these together and re-flatten them out. You can see this dough is starting to stick a little bit here. I'm just gonna use a spatula to pry it up, and I am gonna sprinkle my surface with a little bit of that flour, so good thing we had that ready. Okay, so as I'm reflattening this, you can see my hands are getting stained by the raspberries. This should come out, but it's also making the surface stained, and it's also adding more moisture into the dough than I really want. I don't want the surface to be really slippery and wet. So one thing I like to do is I like to keep paper towels handy, and I will place these over the dough and just press down that way instead. It absorbs any excess moisture, keeps your hands clean, it keeps the scones looking a little bit prettier too. Flatten this again. I'm going to cut it again in half. Place those halves on top of each other. At this point, I feel like I could use a few more berries, so I am just going to be pressing those into the dough right now. So I like to repeat this pressing and cutting and stacking process about 4 to 5 times. This is going to help give us really nice tall layers. I also like cutting and stacking better than folding over itself. I've found that it makes the scones less likely to topple over in the oven. Just a neat little trick I learned. Okay, I'm feeling pretty good about the dough at this point. I've folded it over itself plenty of times. So now I'm going to form it into a rectangle that's approximately 8 inches by 5 inches. You can cut these scones into any shape you'd like. You can even make a disc and cut them into wedges like I do with my classic recipe, but I am just going to be using my knife to cut them into squares. Now, whenever you're cutting your scones or biscuits or any kind of dough like this, always press straight down. So never saw through the dough. You're always just going to press straight down. This is another trick to help keep those scones from toppling over while they're in the oven. Helps them rise nice and tall. All right, let's transfer these over to a parchment paper lined baking sheet. Take a look at that. So you can already see those nice layers in there from all that stacking that we did. Now, if you want these scones to be really uniform, you could actually trim off the edges around the sides. I don't do that, it's not that important to me. I don't want to waste any of the dough, but it's an option if you're looking for really pretty scones, really uniform scones. And because I love sugar, I like to sprinkle them with just a little bit more before they go in the oven. These I don't brush with milk or cream or anything like that, though you could. I just put the sugar right on top. I actually want these to be a little bit closer together. They don't need to be touching, but I like to keep them pretty close while they're baking. All right, take this over to your preheated oven, and they're going to need to bake for about 15 to 17 minutes. I usually look for the tops to be turning a nice light golden brown. You do want to make sure you let these cool before they finish baking. Once they've cooled, let's take a peek at this. Look at that beautiful raspberry marbled side. And that is how you make possibly my favorite scone recipe ever. I hope you guys enjoyed today's recipe, and if you try this one out, please let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. I love these.